When I came to San Francisco, I heard a rumor about a mysterious car that ran the streets of the city in the 60s and 70s. It seemed like every gearhead I met had the same grainy old pic on a cell phone, and the story was always the same. There was a brutally fast 55 Chevy that every kid with a quick car wanted to race, but they had to beat a certain 56 Chevy in order to get that chance. That 56 Chevy was called the Underdog, and for obvious reasons, it was its own legend. Because not only was it a straight-up gasser-style street brawler with a straight axle under it, it also came out of one of the most secretive and oldest neighborhoods on the West Coast, San Francisco's Chinatown. American car culture has found its way all around the world. It's a national treasure that has gone global and soaked deep into just about every aspect of modern life, and most people don't even know it. I'm Dan Stoner, and I've spent my life searching for the legends of underground car culture hidden in plain sight, and telling their stories that nobody else can. Some you might be familiar with, some you might not. These are the stories you've heard of, but have never actually heard. This is the Motor Underground. The first Chinatown in America happened because of the gold rush in Northern California in 1849. Chinese came to San Francisco and built a support system of the largest boomtown on the West Coast. But the city they helped build wasn't about to let them enjoy all the fruits of their labor. They'd be confined to a few square blocks of San Francisco, literally stacked on top of each other, through repressive city ordinances that kept their heads down to work themselves to death. But that much downward pressure can sometimes create a diamond, too. Over the next 100 years, Chinatown became a vibrant, walled city of its own. The Italians would build their North Beach neighborhood on one side, the financial district developed on the other, and the wealthy would build their mansions on Nob Hill overlooking Chinatown from the south. Chinatown's living quarters were cramped, the buildings were in poor condition, public services were spotty, and the rules for San Francisco seemed to be different for the Chinese. And to support themselves, they created family associations with their own networks of banking, schools and healthcare, commerce, and even immigration. These associations, called tongs, also developed their own networks of protection. Good, bad, or ugly, Chinatown's tongs took care of their own. Now, during World War II, Chinatown became a destination for the military on shore leave, but also just enough of an exotic playland without ever having to step foot on foreign soil. Nightclubs, theaters, restaurants, bars, and shops all promised a taste of the Orient while allowing everyone with some money in their pocket to escape reality for the night. But then, something happened after the war. The middle class emerged. And the middle class created the most valuable American export ever conceived: the teenager. For the first time in history, the idea that there was a transition period between childhood and adulthood took root in the new suburbs springing up across the US. And in Chinatown, young parents of the 50s and 60s watched their kids soak up rock and roll and television, public school sports, and a life of leisure they could have never imagined. These kids were getting driver's license with the express intention of having a good time first and going to work a close second. Before they took over their parents' stores and businesses, they were going to enjoy themselves, damn it.
In the periods of the 60s and the 70s, Chinatown back then was thriving. It was a 24/7 community. Tourism was San Francisco and Chinatown was on everybody's list.
I was born in 1954, and I grew up in San Francisco North Beach district, lived on Greenwich and Stockton Street. It was a very nice, quiet area at the time. And my relatives and everybody were fairly close, so it was a very good family type neighborhood at the time.
Austin's father served at the shipyard in Oakland.
In the Navy.
He was able to have citizenship. Then it was only afterwards that his father changed his paper name to Louis, his birth name.
What's a paper name? What is that?
The paper son. Yeah, he was a paper son. His father was a paper son.
In the early days, that's 90% of people had paper sons.
That's how you're allowed to immigrate to the U.S.
Yes.
was through a paper sponsorship. So if you were a baby born in Toisan, you had another last name, he would sponsor you as you're my paper son. So they were able to have come to America, and then you would later file for your citizenship until one president at some time said if you had served in the military at any level, anything, you were given automatic citizenship. And that's
If you
when,
fought for this country, you're a citizen.
yeah.
I think it's hot rodding stems from the World War II veterans coming back and doing it, and like you said, the Italians and the rest of the Caucasian community, they had the influence in building cars like that. As the Asian community, no, we didn't have that. We just had to pick it up and go from there. But we get the influence from seeing them around, so that's how we started.
My father used to live in Chinatown, no, North Beach too, at the apartments. But he would tell me stories if he had to go into Chinatown to go to school, and back then it was my mother, his girlfriend and stuff. He would have a good time, but by the time he had to go back, he had to cross Broadway and would have to face a bunch of Italians. So he grew up in a very different time, and there was a lot of prejudice back then, but there's still some now, but not as much. But he had a lot of fights.
Back then they used to say from one point to the next, like Broadway and all the way down, I think Sacramento or down to Bush Street. This is the square, and you're not allowed to go outside. And remember I told you my friend that the Soprano friends, well, they said they stopped him in the middle of the street. Where are you going? I mean, this is the police force enforcing a zone where the Chinese were not allowed to go outside the perimeter, a curfew time. And then they says, we're going to go home. And so they went the other way. But they were stopped, and they were children.
Well, if you were in Chinatown, you really didn't have to worry about that kind of stuff. But if you had to go outside, yeah, there was always that kind of tension and that kind of things that did happen. In fact, back in the 60s, my dad wanted to buy a house in Serramonte. Went to the model homes. The salesperson wouldn't show him the homes. This is in 64.
Back then, any areas like West Portal and all that, the nicer areas, of course, but yeah, they didn't allow it. They just find some reason why you can't buy it. And then my father had to buy the house out there. Of course, it's cheap back then, probably $20,000 or less. But anyway, yeah, so we were kind of stuck there and grew up there. And eventually they moved, Asians moved out, Avenues, Richmond, Sunset, and all that.
But we're dating this really a prehistorical time, that we weren't allowed to do, the 20s, the 30s, and then finally, 1950, they loosened up the belt. They were able to sell to Asians outside. I see people from the Pingyun projects who said, oh, they lifted the ban, and so now we can go and buy something out in the avenues.
Well, my parents had a hard life, and they provided us with a better life, and I think that's how it goes.
You were expected by your parents to just grow up right. They did not have time to discipline us.
And some kids got into trouble because of that too. But
my parents would let me go out, like they used to have New Year's celebration, on Grant Avenue, and everybody would throw confettis and everything at 12 o'clock. Here I am, 10 years old. I'm over there picking up all the confettis and throwing it up in the air too.
There's quite a few pool halls. There's a Chinese center for the basketball and sports, Leeways for other people to hang out, talk about a lot of cars and everything else. So there's different groups that you can join and associate with.
I was in high school, so I was 16, 17 years old, seeing these straight axle cars coming along, and also Alice also made spindle cars, so they were always jacked up gasser type looking cars. And I went to an automotive shop, and we got to play with cars there, and then got father. So, and seeing the cars drive around, all the older kids had cars, and you'd be seeing them all the time.
And then in 1967, the Summer of Love combined the civil rights movement, rock music, experimental drugs, the beat movement, and a sense of real teen freedom into a cultural earthquake that would send ripples from its epicenter in San Francisco out across the globe. But that age of discovery would be complicated for Chinatown's youth.
So Chinatown encompasses 30 blocks. And because if you lived in the center of Chinatown, basically the housing is stacked up on top of each other. So the people that live in maybe the public housing, Pingyun, or even some of the other SROs, single room occupancies, don't have a lot of space. So they would have to, leave their living quarters and come out.
There was two places where the guys hung out, and that was Leeway's, the pool hall, and we had the Portman Square smoke shop. So that's where me and my guys hung out. That's where like Ron Fong, we always said this: Leeway was a communist, was a bunch of communist guys, and we were Republicans.
Leeways was like a center. The older group, the guys maybe 10 years older than I was, they started that business, and it was like a little pool hall, little pinball machines. The pinball machines had you earn some money. It's like gambling, I guess. And a lot of the older guys, and those guys had the cars, the motorcycles, and so forth. And my dad grew up in Chinatown, so he knew a lot of those people, and he told me pretty much, stay away, don't go there. But of course, teenager, you're gonna see what it is about.
And so our parents, of course, would say, don't hang out with those bad people. And I said, they're not bad, they're cool. That's what we see,
But Leeway was dangerous too. Didn't have to use fists, right? I mean, there was knives, there was guns, there was back in those days. Oh yeah, I had one. Yeah, I mean, it was back in those days. I mean, it was their terror. Yeah, back then we had territory rights.
Leeway's was so much more than just a pool hall. Short for Legitimate Ways, it was part of a loose network of hangouts run by American-born Chinese kids who wanted to build better lives than their parents, but didn't want to get caught up in Chinatown's vice activities to do it.
We're American-born Chinese. We just get along. It's the newcomers that come in and they want to form their group, and they, challenge, my group is better than your group, or so on. We're trying to we formed a pool hall area to hang out. We're trying to be peaceful. We're trying to help the young men who go out, look for jobs. And that's what it is. It's just a place and an outlet for that. But I guess the foreign-borns, they're the one that wants something changed to fit them.
With gangs like the Wat Cheng and the Joe Boys on one side, and corrupt cops and overt historic racism on the other, the American dream through Legitimate Ways was a rough and rugged road. Out of Leeway's came the Red Guard Party, a community youth movement patterned after the Black Panthers, but also Chairman Mao's Red Book, to organize as a political power. But, as any group of American teens will do, Leeway's on Jackson Street was also the place to find some of the coolest Frisco-style choppers and fast cars in San Francisco.
And back in those days, they had this group called the Red Guard. The Red Guard was starting up because they believe in the Mao Zedong Red Book.
But we knew those guys, so they respected us and we respected them. But right here in the alley was a line. They don't come over to the smoke shop, and we don't go over to into the pool hall.
They were starting that in that leeways. They were meeting in leeways. So consequently, eventually that's what the demise of it.
You just have to get along with everybody and try to do what everybody else do, I guess, and enjoy life here. But it's kind of hard. You know, you have to understand you're coming from another country. You don't really speak the language too well, and you have to exist in an area where you're not too familiar with, and I'm sure it was hard. And I can see why there would be a little jealousy, but you know, that's how it goes.
So in the 60s and 70s in Chinatown, it was a very exciting period. There was open prostitution. You had ladies of the evening walking the streets of Grand Avenue, and it was not frowned on.
What I really loved was it was on close to restaurants. Yeah, great place to eat. Everything was accessible, and we used to hang out. And the restaurants used to stay open until about 3 in the morning, and we would just have what we call suya.
We all went there for snacks, or after dance club closed, we would go and have suya, which is after closed snack. After the discos closed, we would go have that. And everybody did that. And there's so much nightlife. There were bars, there were dance clubs, there were eateries that opened till 4 in the morning. It was like New York.
So we grew up with the American dream. Back in those days, everybody, you know, had cars. They wanted to race. And I remember fighting. We used to do one-on-one fighting, you know, a fair fight. But, you know, things happen, and now we have guns. But back in the 60s, before the gangs in Chinatown, we all used to fight fair. But then when the immigrants came, things changed, and we had a different kind of gangs, and yeah, it was not a good time.
Back then, there was a lot of gang activity. I mean, the gangs would be part of the associations there to protect family associations and so forth. And then there's gambling and all that kind of stuff. So being a kid, you know, you don't really know any better. You're just running around trying to have fun and whatever. So unfortunately, back then, there's a lot of incidents of murders and killings and so forth. And if you get involved with it, it's very easy. Fortunately, I was not involved in any of that, but a lot of my friends were.
Scene was just they were more like Chinatown hoodlums, you know, Chinese hoodlums, gangsters and triads and all that picture. You know, I stayed away from that world too. So yeah, I knew going to high school, you knew who they were. I mean, so, you know, some of them, you know, they were friendly with you, and some of them were not.
So it came to a point where they were just recruiting. And at that time, I didn't go. 10 of my buddies went. And, you know, it's a good thing I didn't go with them because, you know, some of them died, some of them went into jail. And, you know, that's how it was.
And so you got those gangs related, the Wachings and you know, the Tong boys and stuff. So each group has, you know, their group, and they're fighting among each other too. You know, it's not just us. We can care less about fighting over what, you know?
Yeah, the drug boys and shit. You know, those are punks. Those are punks. Those guys, they just try to do extortion. Yeah, the Watching, I mean, the Watching didn't, they were like the Italian mafia, right? They took care of their own, okay? And the same thing with the Chinese mafia. The Watchings and the drug boys and shit, they were extortionists. They screwed anybody up.
Well, there were many things. There were extortions and things like that going on. And that's, you got your gangsters and what they want. You want protection? Give us a little, play money type of, some kickback. And so that's how they would protect their storefront or protect them.
But it seemed as though, for all the dark paths these American-born Chinese youth were being pulled toward, they turned to Chinatown's gas stations and garages to forge their own.
In Chinatown, Mixon Auto Supply was the main place that I would hang out because we just through the connections. But then we hung out in a lot of garages, a lot of Chinatown garages because of motorcycles and cars, because there was no space really to hang out. In the avenues, I hung out T&P Arco. There was a Chevron on Arcuello. There was a 76 on Geary and 33rd or 34th, and there was gas stations all over the place. And we would just, it depends on who you hung around, and that's the gas station you hung out.
But we would watch the guys who take so much pride in ownership, and they would help each other repair and improve and maintain their car. It's called pride of ownership. And because, we all didn't have a lot of money in the day, we'd find any way to get that part, to repair it and change it out yourself. So that's how you built a kind of a culture, a car culture in Chinatown.
And right in the midst of this youthquake, a mixed Asian kid with a job at a Chinatown gas station and a new Chevy would start his own revolution that we would still be talking about 50 years later.